What forces led to the formation of the universe? What are the long-term patterns of ocean surface temperature and the effect on the environment? How can we accurately predict the formation, path, and strength of hurricanes? What is the genetic basis for disease, and how do we use that information to develop personalized medicine? What tools do researchers need to tackle such complex problems? Traditionally, there have been two approaches to scientific inquiry: theory and experimentation. The last few decades have been witness to an unprecedented growth in computing power, which has led to a new third pillar of scientific inquiry: computational science. Using computational science, researchers are able to conduct real-world experiments with mathematical models of complex, naturally occurring phenomena within the virtual laboratory of computer memory.
Well, when I arrived at the University of Miami, I spent the first year talking to faculty, the deans, about what the needs were, particularly with respect to the research mission of the university. And over again, I discovered that one of the barriers was we simply didn't have large-scale computing power. Too many of our researchers were forced to deal with toy-sized problems. What we needed to do was leverage all the resources across the university to create a single large-scale entity that would allow our researchers to tackle real-world problems.
The center was created to catalyze transdisciplinary research in science and engineering through what the National Science Foundation calls the cyber infrastructure, which is basically software, hardware, and expertise to address complex problems of the 21st century. The center is organized among 5 programs. So one of the programs is about physical science and engineering, including climate, hurricane prediction, weather prediction, computational fluid dynamics. And another focus area for the center is the bioinformatics, tackling the nature of human diseases. Also, we have a very vibrant community of data mining, visualization, and computational chemistry, whether this has to do with drug development or with chemical composition of the oceans and so forth.
What the university's done is we've created a fiber optic network across all the campuses right now in a ring. And this ring means that whether I'm sitting in the medical school in my office, or my colleagues are sitting over in the Marine School or in the Coral Gables campus, you've got access to the data, to the processors, as if you were sitting there. You now have a bandwidth going between the campuses at 10 gigabits. In the last 3 years, we've added 2 major supercomputers. One, the Pegasus system, which is about 5,500 CPUs, and the other is the Ares system, which is about 1,500. When you're taking a look at very large projects and experiments that scientists are running, there was no way to compare large population sets beforehand.
For example, the human genome have a massive amount of data. You cannot tackle them without a massive amount of computing power. It simply takes too long to examine all the possibilities.
We are producing 10 terabytes of data every week from our genomic sequences. It's humanly impossible to actually have someone dealing with 10 terabytes of data every week.
We're actually going to be in excess of 1.2 petabytes of storage. Now all of a sudden we can do it on campus as well.
The computational approach begins with a description or mathematical theory of a physical phenomenon that occurs in nature. Massive amounts of data are collected from examples of the physical phenomenon via instruments or sensors, so as to provide details for the description or theory. Eventually, a mathematical model of the phenomenon is developed that captures the essential characteristics of the phenomenon, a model that lends itself to computational simulation and analysis. A type of model is a graphic representing a logical mesh in the computer, where each item in the mesh corresponds to an area in space and contains information about that space relevant to the model.
The reason we want these large computers is they enable us to use many more of these grid cells, or subvolumes of the atmosphere.
For example, a weather model might represent the current weather in each square kilometer of the Earth with a set of descriptors such as current wind direction, temperature, pressure, and humidity. The model would describe how the characteristics of each square kilometer change as a result of the weather interactions with bordering areas.
The most important element of my research is trying to understand how weather and climate affect each other, how they interact. And so we're using these very, very high resolution climate models that are actually capable of capturing day-to-day weather phenomenon and how the day-to-day ocean variability and how those two things interact to affect the longer-term, larger-scale climate. By using unprecedented resolution, we've been able to actually use computer-based models that actually resolve how eddies in the ocean interact with the atmosphere. And we haven't been able to do this in global climate models before. And our project is to, for the first time ever, to run that model for, order of 150 years to really see how these resolved eddies impact the statistics of climate.
The silver king is a very sought-after sport fish, was here at the time of the dinosaurs, so it's lived through climate changes that generates in its own right about $6 billion in the southeastern United States for sport fishing. We try to establish where the limits are of human exploitation so that we can provide managers the information they need to make the right decisions beforehand instead of suffering the consequences and then having to deal with that problem. We're bringing together very complex biological models that integrate the components of populations, the birth, death, and growth rates, with other species. But we link that into the physical system to actually get the behaviors that we think replicate nature. This is a small computer that monitors every second the water temperature, light level, depth, and salinity of the water. The tag separates from the fish, goes to the surface, it uplinks the data to the satellite. The satellite then essentially puts it in the network and we receive an email saying, your data is ready and here I am. That data provides the animal's trip in migration, so we physically track the animal through the ocean layers as it migrates the distances.
The next level of the hurricane modeling development will be on the impact. We would no longer just forecast it's going to rain, it's going to be how much winds. So we really have to forecast how much damage will be done. If you want to protect life, property, and things, there needs to be action to be taken based on forecast. So we really need to produce forecasts within a few hours of real time to make next 5-day forecast. Without high-performance computing facility, none of this model even possible to test in the real forecast mode. We expect the next generation model will give them a lot more detailed information, help the decision-making process. Also, the hurricane modeling development recently has been trending to interdisciplinary research, and this has actually provided us a new tool to recruit graduate students and undergraduate students.
Computational fluid dynamics is using very powerful parallel computing to solve a very complicated Navier-Stokes equation. In particular, we're interested in turbulence, which is an unresolved problem in physics and very important issue for the supersonic aerodynamic design. For example, one project we are doing now is to design new concept supersonic airplane to minimize the sonic boom. And currently, there's no commercial supersonic flight because the sonic boom very loud. FAA forbid supersonic flight on land. The only place you can fly is above the ocean. When you do the supersonic flight, the sonic boom is generated by shockwave. But how can you resolve the shockwave, which is discontinuity? In calculus, we understand if it's a discontinuous, you couldn't get a differential. But there is a discontinuity, how do we resolve it? So we developed some very advanced numerical algorithms. Eventually, if we can really resolve this turbulence very well, and then we can save a lot of testing, like wind tunnel testing. Wind tunnel testing is very expensive because computing is relatively easier to set up than experiment.
The way that diseases are treated today, empirical experimental science is applied almost exclusively. Now, using computational science, there are volumes of data processed from genetic sequencing. The more insight obtained from seeing these sequences, the more diseases can be pinpointed and new therapies designed.
We're going to be looking at specific genes, over 450 such genes, in over 2,000 individuals using the next generation sequencing approach. It's going to be one of the largest autism sequencing efforts in the world.
And what next generation sequencing is the ability now to, instead of sequencing a few thousand or tens of thousands of base pairs from the human genome, which is about 3.3 billion base pairs, we're able to sequence as many as 300 billion.
For us as genomicists, we need CCS to be able to take these data and be able to interpret the data and to analyze the data. It's like the perfect marriage. We couldn't exist without each other.
Well, I think what we're seeing here is the beginning, and I still think that we're basically at the beginning, of a much hyped idea called genomic medicine.
It's going to change the face of medicine because we're going to know so much more about what causes diseases, how we might be able to prevent them, what therapies might work better on an individual depending on their genetic background. And in fact, NIH is funding several programs right now to look at the ability of including the whole genome sequencing in a medical record.
The focus of my research is synthetic biology on novel organisms. We are taking the pre-existing viruses and modifying them in order to create useful products, such as vaccines. For example, we are taking viruses such as polio and flu, and we are modifying their proteins in order to alter the way they express in cells and basically trying to attenuate these viruses such that they don't express as efficiently and they can serve as vaccines. This process is called death by 1,000 cuts. For example, the capsid protein of the poliovirus. It consists of 881 amino acids. These can be encoded by 10 to the power of 442 different mRNA sequences that can code for it. Now we have to select one, the best one, that can encode for this protein while not express that well. Using one computer, for example, and a simple algorithm, this can take eons of computation. In order to reduce now this time, we have to invent either much better algorithms or we have to invest much more computational power.
The fact that now scientists have a place to go, a central location to look for how they're going to solve their problems, I think adds a lot to the science that's here right now.
We have over 900 users now at the University of Miami alone.
3 years into the life of the center, we are definitely the largest computational center in the state of Florida. We are one of the top 3 computational centers in the Southeast, and we are one of the top 20 academic centers in the United States.
But I think the most important thing is how will this affect our faculty's ability to get NSF funding to tackle large-scale problems? How will it affect our medical school personnel's ability to get NIH funding to attack large-scale problems?
We wouldn't be in the position we're in now in terms of the genomic technology if we didn't have the bioinformatics and the support in order to handle the data.
The confluence of being in the perfect environment and now having what seems to be the perfect computational environment has created a vista for us, an opportunity that I think is unmatched worldwide.
I want to make sure that our researchers can tackle any problem their imagination can imagine without having the tool, the computational science tool, be a limiting factor. So our center will continue to grow and will continue to support our researchers as they push the boundaries of the problems that they can explore. Now that the University of Miami has the Center for Computational Science, with a computational infrastructure that is among the best in the country, we plan to introduce new academic programs that will teach students how to use this powerful new scientific paradigm. Computing is the future, and the future is taking shape at the University of Miami.